If you want to pump your body and expand your mind, there's only one place to go. Mind Pump. Mind Pump with your hosts, Sal DiStefano, Adam Schaefer, and Justin Andrews.
You just found the world's #1 fitness, health, and entertainment podcast. This is Mind Pump. All right, so in today's episode, we're going to talk about how to get back into training, either if you've been injured or you've had a long layoff, or let's say you had a baby. Like, how do you get back into working out? And then how big of a difference does this make in terms of the quickness and speed at which you progress, get back to where you were before, maybe even surpass where you were before? So in this episode, we talk all about that, and we walk you through step by step the things you should focus on to getting yourself back to where you were before and beyond. Now, this episode is brought to you by one of our sponsors, Paleo Valley. They have some great products. Our favorites are their grass-fed meat sticks. They're delicious. They're grass-fed. It's the best jerky type product I've had anywhere. Great macros. They also have a supplement that's called Organ Complex. It's organ meats in capsule form. So if you like to get the nutritional value of eating things like spleen, heart, kidney, and liver, but you don't like the way they taste, like most people, try Organ Complex capsules. Anyhow, go check them out. And because you listen to Mind Pump, you actually get 15% off their products. Head over to paleovalley.com/Mind Pump. Just use the code MINDPUMP15. That's MINDPUMP15 for that 15% off. Also, in this episode, we do talk about several programs that are very applicable to this episode. So we talk about MAPS Starter, MAPS Prime, MAPS Prime Pro, and MAPS Anabolic. Now, each one of those programs on their own is over $100. So that's close to $500 or more for all those programs. But right now, you can get all of them together, every single one, Starter, Prime, Prime Pro, MAPS Anabolic, all for $149.99. In other words, you pay $149.99, so $149.99, and you get access to all those programs for life. Go check them out. This is a very, very short-time offer just for this episode. Head over to mapsjuly.com. Again, that's MAPSjuly.com. You know, one of the most frustrating things in fitness has got to be, and it's also one of the things I get some of the most questions on consistently, is like how to start back up with training after either an injury or pregnancy or a long layoff. Mm-hmm. Like, where do I go? Where do I start? How do I get myself back into it? And the reason why it's such a challenge, of course, if you're injured, it's like, okay, well, I just had surgery or I just healed from this injury. How do we prevent that from happening again? Other times it's, I can't just jump into what I was doing before, or I did jump into what I was doing before, and I quickly realized, that it was not a good idea.
I love this conversation. In fact, I think this is the third or fourth time that our marketing team has told us that they want to hear a conversation about something specifically based off of their research and what they've heard people and asking and emailing, and they've put together this. And I don't think that we've ever talked specifically to this. And obviously we have to do the best that we can to speak in general, because if we were rehabbing a specific injury, there's obviously very specific exercises. Yeah. But in general, there are some rules and principles that you kind of follow as a coach and a trainer when you get somebody who is recently coming off an injury or a surgery, and how do you start them and what does that progression kind of look like? And so I don't think we've actually outlined an episode that kind of covers this.
Yeah, no, it's a good topic. I think it's an important one because so many mistakes are made at this point. I can think back to the few times that I've been injured or had to not work out, and I'm normally extremely consistent. But there's two times I can think of off the top of my head. One was I had shoulder surgery. So on my left shoulder, I had my AC joint resected. So they had to actually remove some of it. And that was a healing process. And I remember the challenge of going back into the gym and working out, because part of you, this is also, by the way, this is a challenge that trainers run into when you train ex-athletes. Mm-hmm. You remember vividly your fitness and your capabilities. So you have this kind of skewed concept of what going easy is going to be like. Yeah. You overestimate, like, oh, well, normally
to warm up with this weight.
Yes. This is easy. I'll just do this. And I made big mistakes doing that, which took me so much longer to recover and get back to where I was before.
I really feel like there's two major categories of people in this situation, right, that have been injured. Either one, you're experienced, knowledgeable, and you have an understanding of this, and you have a tendency to do too much, which is what you're alluding to. Or B, you're the person who's absolutely clueless. You completely rely on...
Or terrified to get back to it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so you avoid things, because what happens is you go through rehab, and normally rehab is very, very basic to just get you back, right? They don't...
Their goal is range of motion.
That's it. Right. Yeah. And many times you don't get back to optimal range of motion. Many times they put you in a little circuit with 6 or 8 other people inside the room, and you're doing some very generic basic exercises, and there's not a lot of emphasis on detail and range of motion and form and technique, and it's really just, let's get this joint moving again, and so they can go back and do basic functions and get back to real life, and then from there you have to go figure it out. And this is many times where this fell in our lap, and you get this person who now just had this, knee surgery or shoulder surgery like you're talking about, or back surgery, and now I get this client, where do I start them, and what does that look like? And the first thing that always comes to mind is stability and connection. Like we've talked about this before. When you break, and let's say your arm, and it's casted up for months at a time or whatever, and then they break it and they open it up, and you notice two things right away. One, there's obviously this massive atrophy that's happened, like your arm or your leg, whatever was cast, just gone away, and even the ability to move those muscles in that area all of a sudden feels so weird. It almost feels unfamiliar, like wiggling your fingers feels so weird, or flexing your quad after it's been, you're like, whoa, this feels, I don't feel connected the same.
Okay, so you're hinting at or alluding to the big thing you need to focus on. So I think a lot of us, when we see an injury and we see that it's healed, we think, oh, the muscle is healed, the tendon is no longer torn, the bone is healed. So now all I got to do is just kind of go easy and start working out, and everything should be okay. Okay, so what happens when you're injured and you immobilize something, or you can't move it, or you're not moving it like you used to, you don't just lose muscle, you don't just lose strength, you don't just lose, maybe even bone density and that kind of stuff after long periods of time. You also lose neural connections. You actually lose the ability to connect and control this muscle. So Let me give you an example. Maybe you've never been injured or ever been in this situation, but maybe you've had a long layoff. So you worked out consistently for a year, you took 3 months off, you go back to the gym, and you get back under the bench press or the leg press or the squat, and you notice right away you're shaky. You ever notice that? Like you take time off, and normally when you press, it's real smooth, but then all of a sudden it's like, it's like, what is going on? Why am I?
Like all of a sudden, my body's unfamiliar with this movement I've done a million times.
Yeah, it's like your muscles are laughing or something. I remember as a kid, I'd be like, this is so weird. And what it is you've lost that ability to really connect and control that muscle. You have to have that first before you can progress to anything else. That is the most important adaptation, because if you push beyond that capability, what you'll end up doing is creating this really bad imbalance and movement pattern issue, which will then make the injury come back in a hurry and much worse.
I mean, you end up, and you see this all the time, people end up like creating these compensatory patterns as a result of being immobilized and having something that maybe they can't place as much pressure on one foot, or the certain ranges of motion going left to right. Some of their joints are going to be susceptible to wanting to not stabilize the way they used to, and so you feel your way through a lot of these movements. But a lot of times you're trying to blow right past it and get back to who you used to be, and lift the kind of weight you used to be, do the kind of rigorous activity you were capable of previously. But if not addressed and not focused on through this transition, could create some real problems down the road.
Well, my very unscientific way of explaining this to clients would be like this. It'd be like, okay, if you had an injury, somewhere, whether it be the knee, arm, whatever, and it's immobile, right? It gets injured, you're not using it anymore. You tear your ACL, your MCL, or you break your forearm, you're not using it anymore, so it's immobile, casted up, or in a brace, or on crutches, or in a wheelchair. What ends up happening is the brain stops sending neurons there like it was before. So, and I'd use a number like this just for the sake of explaining this. I'd say, so when you go to wiggle your fingers like this, your brain sends 100 neurons over there to move it. And that's what it requires to do this activity. Well, once it gets casted up and it's no longer moving like that, what the brain does is it reprioritizes those elsewhere. It says, okay,
prunes that area as priority.
That's right. It says, oh, we're not having to do this anymore. We no longer doing that. The body
wasted energy.
That's right. It's wasted. So we're going to send those other places and prune it, to your point, and stop doing that. And so then you get uncasted, or you are now out of rehab and it's time to start exercising again. You don't automatically just go from 0 to 100 neurons back to 100 neurons firing there. I have to retrain that mental connection first there to reprioritize that neurological connection to get there. And that part is so crucial to the recovery process.
Yes, because when you're telling your body to do something, it understands movement, not necessarily connection to the muscles. And so, to the point we were saying earlier, if you don't learn how to stabilize and connect, you're going to develop these compensatory systems, where other muscles are doing more work, or you're moving, your leverages are changing and moving. And then if you push past that and you keep working out, now you strengthen this bad movement pattern that's not ideal, which makes it so much harder to correct in the future. I remember one client in particular that I worked with. She was a D1 soccer player. In fact, she was an alternate for the national women's soccer team, so like super athlete. And she hired me, and I trained her for a while, and she was very, very fit. She's one of those clients that she could pretty much do anything that I would tell her to do. She was just a gifted athlete. And I trained her about 2 or 3 days a week with resistance training. And then she got pregnant. And as she got pregnant, of course, your body changes. And at some point, you're not able to engage your core like you could before. Now, before she was pregnant, she had like almost a 6-pack, super tight. We did all this core exercise. She loved working out her core, very connected, very strong. Once we got in the third trimester, which is 3 months long, and leading up to that, even there's changes in connection because of the growing baby. But especially in the third trimester, because she was so small, her belly started to really stretch out, and you can't connect to those muscles like you could before. We couldn't do sit-ups, we couldn't do crunches, we couldn't do ball slams. We could do some rotation, but that really got limited too. And then she had the baby, and we had to wait for a while. She had a C-section, so we had to wait for a while. And then I remember when she came back, she was so like, oh, I can't wait to work core, right? So here's a girl that we used to do active planks with a weighted vest in perfect form, right? And I took her and I said, okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to have you do planks off of your knee, and I'm going to stand behind you and support you. And she looked at me like, why? I could do all kinds of stuff. I said, okay, you sure about that? Yeah. Let's get on the floor and let's try it out. And she was like, this is so weird. She said, I can't activate my core. I can't turn it on. I said, try doing a vacuum. She's like, I can't pull it in. I said, before we do exercises, we have to teach your body how to connect to those muscles again. If we don't do that, everything else we do not only is a waste of time, but will become very detrimental. So the first thing you should focus on when coming out of a layoff or an injury is to stabilize and connect. How is that different than traditional strength training? It's slower.
Much slower.
It's more deliberate. And oftentimes you want to use something that encourages connection, like a physio ball. This is where physio ball or Swiss ball training is tremendously valuable.
Well, this was the idea of Map Starter when we created it, right? Obviously, we were thinking in mind the client who is their first time in the gym or deconditioned, and or somebody who could be an advanced client who's been injured or had surgery and is now returning back to the gym. The same principles apply to both those people. Right. The same. If you're somebody who's never really lifted weights, you also don't have
stabilize and connect.
That's right. You also do not have a good mind-muscle connection to everything in your case. So that person is not connected to almost everything. Someone who's been injured is probably very disconnected to the area where they were injured. So the same principles apply of the stabilization and connection, and that's really the foundation of that. And I think a lot of people that we talk to through the podcast, they avoid that program because it looks too easy or basic, or I've lifted before for years, and so they think that I shouldn't start there. Give me the other program that looks fancier or looks more difficult.
Well, 'cause you don't identify with it,
right?
Especially if you've done it before and you're familiar with working out and you have experience to be able to humble yourself and take pride and ego out of it and go where you really need to go. That's a hard step, but honestly, that's one of those programs like it addresses all of those things immediately that you need to focus on, which is being able to recruit where you need to recruit more efficiently again, and to be able to reconnect. It places you in these unstable type environments with like the stability ball, or these type of moves that are a little bit more focused on balance and being able to ground yourself properly. But that's what you need to build back upon to get you into the kind of shape that you were going in, before you got injured.
Listen, I've been training for 20 years, and still when I've been off for a couple weeks or for sure a month or longer, I go back to many of the principles that were written in that program. So maybe it doesn't look identical
not being injured,
to all of it,
helpful.
but I recognize that, listen, there's no need for me to lift like MAPS Anabolic or MAPS Aesthetic if I haven't trained in a month. If I haven't trained in a month, these same principles apply to me. I still get that same shaky feeling if I haven't been doing a movement, because I've lost that. I've been more sedentary. I haven't been training inside the gym. And so there's no reason for me to skip that foundation, even with someone who's an advanced lifter like myself.
Right. And it's not just that you're preventing injury again, or that you're preventing muscle imbalances, which can cause pain. Those are all true.
You're laying a foundation.
Or even that, right? Here's the selling point. You get there faster. I'm telling you the truth.
Right.
You don't get there faster if you skip this step. You actually get there slower. So if your goal is, I want to get back in shape, strong, fit, whatever, as effectively and fast as possible, then you have to do this step. Skipping this step means you will take much longer, even if you don't injure yourself. Even if you're lucky enough to not hurt yourself, skipping this will slow you down so much it's going to take you much longer. I'll use a silly example, all right? Let's compare two exercises. Let's compare a seated dumbbell shoulder press on a bench. So the bench is set up so that it's supporting my back and I'm sitting on it, versus sitting on a stability ball and doing a shoulder press, right? Obviously, I'm not going to use nearly as much weight on a stability ball. It would be stupid to. It's not a heavy exercise. I'm sitting on a squishy ball. It requires me to stand upright. It requires me to activate my core. It requires me to balance and ground my feet. This is very different than driving into the floor with a shoulder press when I'm on a bench. I can't do that on a ball. I'll throw myself off or lose my balance. I have to balance how I ground. I also have to press balanced. If one is off, I'm rolling off the ball. It's very, very challenging. And I have to slow down. So what is this doing? This is making me, or forcing me, to connect and stabilize to this exercise. If I skip this step and I go on a bench, I'm going to rely on the bench. I'm just going to lift weight. I think I'm going to be doing okay. And again, risk of injury goes up, and it actually takes me longer to progress.
There's literally no way you can rush through those exercises.
Yes.
Which is the actual brilliance of it. It's just because that's a natural tendency a lot of people have when you're really motivated. Like, I really want to get back to good shape. I want to get strong again. But like kind of going through that sounds boring. Doing all these like connection, mobility type exercises can seem like really arduous. When in fact, if you do something like that with stability ball, you are fighting it the whole time, and you're trying to maintain position and grounding, and you're getting a lot of incredibly challenging, intense work, but it's all still centered around that stability focus.
Yes, and I want to add more to this. So let's say I injured my shoulder, and now it's healed, and the range of motion is good, and I got clearance to work out, right? It's not just connecting to the shoulder. So you got to understand the body's very complex. It doesn't think of itself as separate parts, right? It doesn't think itself as arm and shoulder and whatever. It's all one. It's body. Okay. So not only do I have to connect to my arm being able to do the shoulder press, I have to connect to this movement and to my core and to my legs and to my back. It's relearning how to use this area that it's very disconnected to, but not just that, it's also relearning how to use it while everything else is supporting it. So this is why you don't go in a machine and lock yourself in position and rehab your arm, and why that will be less effective than sitting on something like a stability ball, going slow, stabilizing, and connecting. When you do that, it's the whole body has to kind of rehab. By the way, this is why they show studies, just to kind of take a little left turn. They'll have studies where they'll have someone immobilize one arm, so they'll simulate a broken arm, and then they'll have half the people train one arm, the arm that's not immobilized, and half the people not train either arm. And you know what they find? The people that train one arm actually lose less muscle from the arm that's immobilized. Why? Because the whole body is connected and it communicates. So that's why stability and connection is a whole body thing. It's not really just an isolated, this is the area, I hurt my knee, let me connect to the quad and the hamstring. It's how do I connect to the whole body while I connect? Here's another example. Look at a dumbbell row, right? Traditional dumbbell row, if you don't have connection or stability issues, your knee is on the bench, hand is on the bench, you got good posture, you're rowing the weight, you're doing great, right? But if you have connection and stability issues because you haven't worked out for a while, either because you're ill, injured, or whatever, well, try this instead. Bend over, place one hand on a physio ball instead. Now I'm supporting myself with a physio ball, but what does it require me to do? I have to be very balanced in order to perform this row properly.
You can't put too much pressure on that arm or it's going to send you.
I can't put too much pressure on my arm. And in fact, I have to keep stability in that supportive arm, just like I have with the rowing arm, and in my core, and balance my feet. And I'm telling you, if you start with stabilization and connection, you will get back to where you were before much, much faster.
Now, there's another part to that, or another thing that you need to do, and it's not necessarily in a different order. In fact, I think you do this simultaneously, and that is priming for the body. So before you go into work, now think of somebody too, like who had their arm in a sling, right? So you get your arm in a sling because it was broken or whatever, and then you finally get it out, and you're able to go back to rehab and stuff. The problem is you were in this kind of rolled position and in an awkward, non-anatomical position of the body, and then you're gonna go into exercising. The body doesn't just go snap back into perfect posture. You've got to relearn that on a neurological level also. And so knowing how to prime the body in specific areas to get you back into that neutral spinal alignment, then you go into your stability type of training. And that is the ideal situation for that client.
Yeah, so priming is different than a warm-up, but you can think of it like a warm-up in the sense that it's done for 10 minutes or so before your workout, pre-workout. So when you get to the gym, instead of walking on the treadmill or doing static stretches or, I don't know, looking on your phone for 10 minutes as your warm-up, you do priming. You prime your body. So what does priming do? It prepares your body for more connection through movements that require no resistance. They're all intrinsic. Most of them are intrinsic, right? So a 90-90, for example, on the ground might be used to prime my hips in a particular way. A combat stretch might be a way to prime my ankle mobility prior to a workout. I may do movements for my scapula or my shoulders to prime them before I go into maybe overhead presses or forward presses or maybe even rows. By the way, here's something that's very important with priming. Priming needs to be individualized. So what I mean by that is you want to prime your body for the areas and things that your body needs to be primed for. Priming for other things won't hurt you, but it can be a total waste of time. Like Justin and I would prime our workouts probably very different. If I prime my workouts like Justin, I would get very little value compared to the value he would get because our bodies are different.
Yeah, and I do like to think of it in terms of like placing your body back in the most optimal alignment and positions for joint function. And you'll notice individually where that happens and occurs. A lot of times you'll notice that more so when you're fatiguing in your workouts or just trying to carry yourself throughout the day and maintain good posture. What tends to occur, and for the majority of people, a lot of times it's kind of coming for everything's making its way forward. So my head's coming forward, my shoulders are coming forward. I'm in this kind of forward crouching position. I'm reaching for everything in front of me. And I mean, this is typical because of the lifestyle that everybody's sort of had to accommodate to now with work and being at a desk. And so a lot of these things tend to show up as taking you out of optimal alignment, which is what we really want to address that before we now add load and stress to the body, which will exaggerate those types of dysfunctions even further, which leads to injury.
Well, and this is the real motivation behind MAPS Prime. And how do you do this in a way that is as individualized as possible,
right,
but helping potentially millions? I mean, that was, and again, probably why, and we've said this before, why we're probably most proud of that program, because of the difficulty it was to, how do we make this general enough that the average person can be in a situation like this and go like, I don't know what to prime. I know I've been hurt. I know I'm not moving
How do
optimally.
I check this on myself?
And you're telling me that Sal says that his is completely different than Justin Adams. Well, I can't tell how they should. So what does that look like? And that's where the assessment came, right? Where we do the 3-zone assessment. We broke the body up. We divided it in 3 areas. We looked at some of the most important basic functions that everybody's body should be capable of doing, most certainly be able to do if you're going to go perform exercises and movements. And then a very simple pass or fail. Not of trying to measure and get every percentage or what's worse or better. It's just you can either do it or you can't do it optimally. If you can't do it optimally, there's an area that we need to address and work on. And again, looking at areas that we saw as the most ideal functions that everybody's body should be able to do.
Yeah, by the way, in MAPS Prime, we include what are called fortification workouts for really bad trouble areas. So where you can do specific workouts for certain areas of the body that you may have challenges with.
Yeah, and that was another thing back to the whole, you go to physical therapy and they sort of try to just regain range of motion. Like, where's the bridge? And that's something that we tried to create to kind of help the transition process of, well, I don't know if I'm like really ready to start adding weights back in the routine, but I definitely want to keep working at getting stronger at this new range of motion. So that's something to focus on, is those fortification sessions.
Yeah, so think of it this way to simplify for people who don't have Prime, right? So you're going to the gym, you had a shoulder injury, it got worked on. The first exercise you're going to do, you listen to the podcast, you're like, okay, I'm going to do a stability ball overhead press. But the problem is, because your shoulder was immobilized for a little while, the scapula doesn't really, externally rotate or depress really smoothly on one side. And so you're like, okay, it takes you 4 sets of doing this overhead press on a physio ball to start to feel it right. Or maybe you don't. And you're like, oh God, no matter what I do, it doesn't feel right?
Clicking sounds, weird stuff starts happening.
Proper priming, again, it's like a warm-up, but the way you're warming up is specific. So in this case, you might do some wall circles or some scapular circles. And what you're essentially doing is you're getting the movement and you're connecting to the movement a little bit. So you're saying, okay, you're getting the shoulder ready to move in this position. Because when you overhead press, using the shoulder as an example, there's a lot of moving parts. It's not just the arm that comes up.
It's not just the major movers, it's the supporting cast to stabilize it.
Yes. And so the priming sets me up so when I jump in, the first set that I do is already functional. It's already working. Now, why is this important? Is it just because it cuts down time on your workout? Well, that's part of it. But here's the real value. Let's say I go in and it takes me 5 sets to get my shoulder, and sometimes never, by the way. So if you're experienced, you might be able to figure out it doesn't feel right and start to move right. But let's say it takes you 5 sets, right? You just did 5 sets of strengthening a bad recruitment pattern. So keep that in mind. If it took you 5 sets to start to feel normal, those were all 5, not just wasted sets, but 5 sets that actually trained something wrong. Yeah. So why not go into it moving right away so you don't start to do that? Because I can't stress this enough. It may be hard to go back to the gym when you're not connected to your muscles, when you have, when things are weak. I promise you it's harder. I have more challenges training people who are fit with bad movement patterns, who have them so solidified, they've built so much armor and strength around a bad recruitment pattern that we have to back out for a long time. It's like, I think there's a quote from Bruce Lee where it says, he could teach someone who's never done any martial arts how to kick easier than to teach a black belt who knows how to kick the wrong way, because they've learned it the wrong way so many times. Getting them to relearn it is a big pain in the butt. So priming does that. It sets you up for your stabilization and connection workout. So right away, you're training the right movement pattern.
It also helps prevent some long-term issues that tend to happen from injury also. So this is something that low back injury is one of the most common injuries, right? I think it's up there with the top 2 or 3.
It's got to be number 1.
Yeah, I think it is, right? So I think it's number 1, 2, or 3, right? It's definitely one of the most common things. I think we've seen it a lot. And everything from bulged discs to throwing backs out to straining muscles in your low back. But what ends up happening is somebody hurts this low back, and then they become immobile. They're either bedridden or they can't really move or do anything for weeks, sometimes months at a time. And then they decide to get back into training. And then because maybe the low back is healed or feels better, and then they start to do exercises, and all the exercises end up doing is end up hurting the low back more. And they're confused, and they think it's because they have a weak back. And a lot of it, more often than not, actually has to do with like what was going on with their hips. Because they were immobile and they weren't doing anything, they weren't training their hips in this dynamic ability that they have to do.
And they lost it.
They lost it. They've lost that neurological connection that we're talking about.
So they're not distributing the load and the force to the other major muscles that contribute to that.
That's right. And the body is so resilient and amazing, and it will get, so that person could go and squat or lunge or do an exercise.
It'll get you through the workout.
It'll get through it. But what will end up happening is the body will overcompensate in other areas, most likely the low back. And now the low back is on fire when you try to do these basic leg exercise and movements, because you've lost that good connection to good range of motion and mobility in the hips. And it actually isn't the low back. It's because when you got hurt in your low back, you stopped moving around. You stopped using the hips the way they're supposed to. They've now lost that, they've pruned that neurological connection there, or reprioritized it to other parts of the body. And then you go, okay, I'm better. Let's go back to moving again. And the hips go like, oh, we don't know how to move like that anymore. And then the low back goes, don't worry, we'll help you out.
Yeah.
And then you go, fuck, that hurts, that bothers me, and I have a bad back. It's like, no, it's not because you have a bad back. Yes, you hurt your back. Yes, maybe you had a bulged disc. But what's happened is you've become immobile. You've lost that neurological connection to those hips and the ability for them to internally, externally rotate like they should. And now the rest of your body is overcompensating to try and help you out. And so this is the real value to me when I think of priming for someone. Isn't just getting you ready, set up for the workout, getting you to move optimally, but it's also to prevent this future chronic pain that comes from injury.
Yeah, I tell you what, like if you're listening to Adam and you're like, oh, I don't know, man, is that really what's happening? Try this out. Take 1 foot and put in a 1/4 inch rise in your soles. Just lift 1 foot 1/4 inch and then walk around.
Oh God, don't do that.
And then tell me, and then tell me how you wouldn't even notice a 1/4 inch. You might not even notice right away. You just walk around, but it kind of feels the same. Tell me how your back feels by the end of the day. You'll start to feel pain because of the compensations that are going on. And that's such a small little thing that, again, you might not even notice when you put it inside your shoe. So that's kind of what Adam's talking about. When you're immobile, it's not just your back that's injured. Everything else is not moving. And it's important to get them to move properly. So when you get into the workout, you're training those proper recruitment patterns so things improve much faster. Okay, so another aspect is correctional exercise. Now, the reason why this is different than what we're talking about, although stabilizing, connecting, priming technically is all correctional in the sense that it's getting you to move better, correctional exercise more specifically is treated very differently in this case, right? So let's say you're doing your stabilization connection workouts. You're in the gym, you're training your major muscle groups, you're doing them in a way where you're stabilizing, connecting. You might be in the gym 3 days a week, maybe 4 days a week max doing this, right? So you're spending 45 minutes to an hour doing these exercises. Correctional exercise is very different. It's short and super frequent. Super frequent. You're doing 10 to 15 minutes twice a day, every single day. This will get you to recover and to improve so fast. This is probably one of the most valuable things that you could do. Now, why is correctional exercise not as long, not as intense, but so frequent? Couple reasons. One, when you're correcting something, if I apply too much intensity and too much load, my body's going to move the way that is more optimal for itself, which means it's going to avoid what I'm trying to train. So if I have a weak area or a weak movement pattern, it's going to skirt around that because there's too much load. And my body's like, just move the weight. Don't worry about this, whatever. And that's just what your body does, right? So we can't go super hard, super intense, or super long. Now, why so frequent? Correctional exercise literally is teaching new movement patterns. Well, I have to do that more than the old movement patterns. And the old movement patterns I'm doing all the time. If I'm walking I remember when years ago, I had my knee in a brace and it was straight because I dislocated my kneecap. And I walked in the brace so that I actually could walk in it, but one leg was straight. So I was walking kind of funny, right? And I did this for it was like 2 months. When I took the brace off, I had this weird movement pattern that I had learned over a 2-month period. And so I literally had to consciously walk a particular way, and I had to do it more than walking the other way in order to learn this new, this better recruitment pattern. So correctional exercise needs to be done this way. You find the right exercise for, let's say you have an ankle injury. Let's say you twisted your ankle and you hurt it. So now it's healed, but now that it's healed, your ankle mobility, your functional ankle mobility, meaning it may be able to move the way it did before, but it doesn't have strength like it used to. So the mobility is kind of not the same. So you want to strengthen it. You want to get it back to where it was before. Well, twice a day for 10 minutes, do something like a combat stretch where you're connecting to this new range of motion, and do it very frequently. What you'll find is in a very short period of time, you'll get back to where you were before by doing this kind of practice.
No, I know I'm going to start to sound like a damn commercial here, but this is also the motivation behind Prime Pro and the reason why we went and looked at all the major joints in the body to give people this direction. How do I know? You bring up I hurt my ankle, but how do I know it's not working properly? I can walk, I can run, I can do all these exercises, but how do I know that I've lost maybe the range of motion in one ankle and not the other? And how do I know that that's limiting me from potentially squatting really well? Or how do I know that that's causing issues in the rest of my body? Well, that was the idea behind that. How do we simplify this so you can go through and you can test each joint? And again, a very simple pass or fail. Either you can move the ankle in its full range of motion or you can't. And a lot of times, and what we're really looking for, so as a coach, right? Because nobody is perfect and very few people are extremely mobile in all their joints. I'm really looking for discrepancies from left to right. Those are going to be, when it comes to chronic pain and rehabbing somebody, the things that where there's major discrepancy from left and right,
asymmetry,
that's going to cause the biggest issue. If you have somebody who just rolled their ankle, to your point, Sal, and they do the test, and they're let's say they rolled their right ankle, right, and they do the test for their left ankle, and their knee can pass their toes 3 inches, and then they go to do their right one that was injured, and it can't even get to the toes. That person, when they squat, I don't even need to see their squat, and I could tell you what's going to happen when they break 90 degrees. When they break 90 degrees, their hips are going to shift over to the side that has more range of motion, and that's going to distribute the weight all the way over to that opposite side. You're going to get low back pain. You're going to get issues in your knee and your hips on the other side. So that's why this is so important, and this is how you figure this out. Is you go through all these major joints, you test them, and as a consumer or an average listener, not a coach, hopefully we're training or helping to see this thing, but as an average person going through this is what you're looking for. You're looking to see, is there a major discrepancy from right to left? And I'm looking for the grossest offenders, and then I'm going to go after that, and then I'm going to do exactly what you said, Sal, is I'm going to do it as much as possible. I'm going to focus on that side with the most discrepancy and try and catch it up to where it has an equal amount of range of motion as the other one, so my body is balanced when it moves.
Now, a lot of the focus for this, it requires a completely different mindset. And you've brought up frequency, but also intention is at the utmost priority with this entire process, because you can go through these movements and see, watch a video and kind of look and see where you want to be or like where your limitations are, but you really need to feel your way through this and be able to squeeze and activate these muscles and feel that contraction, because that's really what is going to start allowing that signal to come back to the brain that, this joint's supported now. This joint support, I feel supported. It feels like things are responding. And so now that's when all of a sudden you get this breakthrough where your body starts to actually have that automatic response it used to have for very specific types of movements where you had limitations before. So it's all about that effort and that intention going into these types of corrective exercises that will help really move you forward and progress you quite substantially.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because when I think about the number one mistake that people make when they go through this program is they do it with the wrong intent.
They just go through the movement.
That's right. And what you have to understand about that is going back to the thing we keep talking about with the neurological connection. When you've been injured, the brain says stop right there because we could get hurt, and you've trained that new pattern to only allow that joint to go right there because it's afraid it's going to hurt if you go any further than that. So when you're trying to regain that new range of motion or find that range of motion that you used to have, there's an intensity and there's an intention behind that.
You have to be very conscious and focused.
100%. And by the way, this was the motivation to the free webinar that we produced to help people through this, because one of the number one things that we got back from people who had Prime Pro was just they weren't certain how to use it or how to do it. And so we created the Prime Pro webinar that's absolutely free. I take you through some of my favorite movements from Prime Pro. And the most important thing for you to watch for in that video is me talking to you through the exercises and the intent that you should have while you're doing it. Otherwise, you just kind of passively go through these movements like a stretch and you never regain that range of motion back.
It's primeprowebinar.com, by the way. I'll tell you a story. So I remember I had a client once who got a hernia, and he had to have the hernia repaired. So as he had it repaired, obviously he's not engaging his core. He's keeping it from engaging on purpose. I remember when he fully healed, he started to develop low back pain. And one of his SI joints started to feel pain, a little bit low back pain, up a little higher as well. And so all I did was I said, okay, here's what we're going to practice. Here's a correctional exercise. And this was appropriate for him. I had him do lying pelvic tilts. Essentially, you lay on your back, knees bent, feet on the floor, and you pelvic tilt and essentially activate the core is what's happening. And I'm moving, back and forth, going from anterior to posterior pelvic tilt. So it's like I'm arching and then flattening my lower back. And it was hard for him to do at first, but I told him, I want you to do 10 minutes in the morning and 10 minutes at night. So essentially you're going to do like, 20 reps and rest a little bit, and 20 reps and rest a little bit until 10 minutes is up, and then do it again in the evening. And then let's see what happens. Within 1 week, the back pain was gone. And within 1 week, we were ready to progress to more challenging core stability type exercises. But it was because he did it frequently. He did it, and he was very good about it. He did it twice a day, like I told him, every single day, and that back pain was gone. But that's how you have to treat correctional exercise if you really want it to work. Okay, so I'm sure people now are wondering,